The twin suns of Tatooine hung like burning eyes in a merciless sky, casting long shadows across the endless dunes of a world that knew only heat, hardship, and the quiet desperation of those forgotten by the galaxy. In the slave quarters of Mos Espa, within a cramped hovel that smelled of sand and recycled air, a woman named Shmi Skywalker held her son against her chest, feeling his heartbeat synchronize with her own. The boy was special. She had known it from the moment of his impossible birth, from the first time she looked into eyes that seemed to hold depths no child should possess. There had been no father, no man, only the Force itself, weaving life from the cosmic fabric in ways the Jedi would later struggle to comprehend. Anakin Skywalker entered existence as a vergence, a focal point of power that would reshape the destiny of trillions. The boy grew up breathing recycled dreams. While other children of Mos Espa learned only survival, Anakin's mind reached beyond the atmosphere, beyond the outer rim, to possibilities that danced like mirages in his imagination. His hands, small and scarred from work, possessed an intuition that defied explanation. When he touched machines, they responded as though alive, as though recognizing a kindred consciousness. By age 6, he could strip down a podracer engine and rebuild it better than factory specifications. By 7, he had constructed a protocol droid from scavenged parts, programming it with a personality that somehow captured warmth and loyalty. By 9, he had begun building a podracer of his own, a thing of salvaged dreams and impossible hope. The desert taught him endurance, the slavery taught him rage, and the Force, that invisible current flowing through all living things, taught him that he was meant for something beyond the chains that bound his mother and himself to Watto, the Toydarian junk dealer whose wings beat like the rhythm of captivity itself. Anakin would lie awake at night in the suffocating heat, listening to his mother's breathing, feeling the weight of her exhaustion, her quiet surrender to a life that offered no escape. He made promises in the darkness. Promises that one day he would free her. Promises that one day he would return with power enough to shatter every chain on Tatooine. Promises that would haunt him across the years like ghosts he could never outrun. The Force whispered to him in those lonely hours. Not in words, but in sensations. In premonitions that flickered through his mind like hollow images from a future both glorious and terrible. He saw himself standing among stars, wielding a blade of pure light. He saw armies bowing before him. He saw his mother's face, proud and free. But he also saw shadows, vast and hungry, reaching toward him with frozen fingers. He saw fire. He saw eyes burning yellow with hate. He saw a woman's face contorted in horror, reaching toward him even as life drained from her expression. These visions troubled him, but he pushed them down, buried them beneath the daily grind of survival and the desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, his life would change. Change arrived in the form of a Queen's starship, damaged and desperate, landing in the wasteland beyond Mos Espa seeking shelter and supplies. Change arrived as a tall Jedi Master named Qui-Gon Jinn, whose presence seemed to carry the weight of centuries, whose eyes saw through surfaces to the truth beneath. Change arrived as a young woman named Padme, disguised as a handmaiden, whose kindness toward a slave boy planted seeds that would grow into an obsession spanning decades. And change arrived as a wager, a pod race, a chance for freedom that Anakin seized with hands that trembled not from fear but from the absolute certainty that destiny was finally catching up to his dreams. The Boonta Eve Classic became the crucible where the boy first touched his true potential. Strapped into a pod racer he had built from scraps, connected to engines that screamed with barely controlled power, Anakin felt the Force flow through him like electricity through circuits. Time seemed to slow. The other racers became predictable patterns. The course, with all its deadly obstacles and killing turns, became a dance he already knew by heart. He saw 3 moves ahead, 5 moves, 10 moves, his consciousness expanding to encompass the entire race as a single unified moment. The crowd's roar faded to white noise, the twin suns blazed overhead, and Anakin Skywalker flew, truly flew, across the desert that had imprisoned him, moving with a grace and speed that made even Sebulba's cheating seem clumsy and slow. When he crossed the finish line first, the chains fell away. Not just from his body, but from his spirit. He was free. He could leave this world. He could become something more. But freedom came with its first terrible cost. his mother would remain behind. The dice had fallen wrong for her. Qui-Gon's money could purchase only one life, and the Jedi had chosen the boy, sensing in him a power that eclipsed all other considerations. Shmi Skywalker knelt before her son in their hovel one last time, holding his face between her hands, looking into eyes that held tears and confusion and a grief too large for a 9-year-old heart to contain. She told him to be brave. She told him not to look back. She told him she was proud, would always be proud, and that he carried her love with him wherever the stars would take him. Then she let him go, watching her miracle child walk away toward a future she would never see, her heart breaking in a way that made no sound but echoed through the Force like a silent scream. The journey to Coruscant should have been wonder itself. The massive capital planet of the Galactic Republic, with its endless cityscape stretching from pole to pole, with its towers that pierced clouds, and its traffic lanes that flowed like rivers of light through artificial canyons. But Anakin saw it through a film of grief, his small face pressed against the viewport of Queen Amidala's ship, watching his home world shrink to a point of light and then disappear entirely. He had gained the galaxy and lost the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. The equation seemed somehow wrong, unbalanced, like a calculation that didn't properly account for the human variables. Qui-Gon Jinn became a temporary anchor in the storm of transition. The Jedi Master saw something in Anakin that went beyond raw power, though that power was staggering, unmeasurable, a font of Force sensitivity that made the testing instruments of the Jedi Temple spike into ranges they had never before recorded. Qui-Gon saw a good heart, a capacity for love that could become either the boy's greatest strength or his most fatal weakness. He saw the chosen one of ancient prophecy, the being who would bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith and ending their shadow that had crept across the galaxy for a millennium. But he also saw a child in pain, a child torn from his mother, a child who needed guidance and protection and the wisdom of the Jedi Code to shape his immense potential toward the light. The Jedi Council saw only danger. In the high chamber where 12 of the Order's greatest masters sat in a circle, Anakin stood at the center, feeling their eyes probe his mind, their collective power pressing against his consciousness like a great weight. Master Yoda, ancient beyond measure, sensed the fear in the boy. Fear of loss, fear of inadequacy, fear of the future itself, and where fear dwelt, the dark side could take root and grow like poison flowers in a garden of light. Master Mace Windu, his expression carved from stone, spoke of the boy's age, of the attachments already formed, of the danger in training one who had known love and loss when Jedi were supposed to know only serenity and the greater love of all living things. The council debated while Anakin waited, feeling like a piece of equipment being evaluated for purchase, his fate hanging on the words of strangers who looked at him and saw not a person but a potential problem. Qui-Gon Jinn argued with a passion that bordered on defiance. This was the chosen one. This was the virgins the prophecies had foretold. To reject him would be to reject destiny itself. The Force had brought them together for a reason. The boy deserved a chance. The galaxy deserved the fulfillment of the ancient promise that one would come to bring balance, to end the darkness that the Sith represented. But the Council remained unconvinced, their decision negative, their judgment final. Anakin would not be trained. He would be returned to his home world, or found some other placement. The door was closing before it had even fully opened. Then the Queen's mission to liberate Naboo from the Trade Federation's invasion changed everything. Qui-Gon took Anakin with him back to the besieged planet, unable to simply abandon the boy, unwilling to let destiny slip away because of the Council's fear. On Naboo, in the palace hangars and the grassy plains, in the underwater Gungan cities and the gleaming halls of Theed, the conflict reached its crescendo. Qui-Gon and his former Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, confronted the Sith Lord Darth Maul, a creature of pure menace with a double-bladed lightsaber that spun like a wheel of fire. The duel raged across the Theed generator complex, a ballet of light and shadow, of impossible acrobatics and lethal precision. Anakin, told to stay in the cockpit of a Naboo starfighter, could only watch as the battle unfolded. But the Force had other plans. When the hangar came under attack from battle droids, the boy's instincts took over. His hands moved across the fighter's controls with the same intuition he had applied to pod racers and protocol droids. The ship hummed to life. autopilot engaged, and suddenly, Anakin was flying, not by choice but by necessity, swept up in the tide of combat, his small fighter rising into space toward the massive Trade Federation battleship that hung in orbit like a malevolent moon. Above Naboo, surrounded by starfighters and explosions and the vast silence of vacuum, Anakin touched war for the first time. His mind expanded to encompass the chaos, reading trajectories and attack patterns, dodging with preternatural grace, firing with accuracy that defied probability. When his fighter was damaged, when systems failed, and he tumbled helplessly into the battleship's hangar bay, he found himself at the heart of enemy territory, and still the Force guided him. His torpedoes, launched in a desperate gamble, struck the ship's main reactor. The explosion began deep within the vessel's core, a chain reaction that would consume the entire battleship and shut down every battle droid in the conflict below. Anakin barely escaped, his fighter screaming out of the hangar as flames chased him like the breath of a dragon. Below, on Naboo's surface, Qui-Gon Jinn was not so fortunate. Darth Maul's lightsaber pierced his chest, the red blade emerging from his back in a moment that seemed to freeze time itself. Obi-Wan's scream of rage and grief echoed through the Force. The young Jedi Knight, fueled by emotion that contradicted every principle of his training, cut the Sith Lord in half, sending both pieces tumbling into the generator shaft, but victory came too late for the Master. Qui-Gon died in Obi-Wan's arms, his last words a command, a plea, a burden that would shape the next 13 years. Train the boy. Promise me you will train him. He is the chosen one. He will bring balance. When Anakin landed and rushed to the generator complex, he found Obi-Wan kneeling beside a pyre, Qui-Gon's body burning according to Jedi tradition, smoke rising toward the sky like a departing spirit. The boy had lost another anchor, another protector, another figure who had seen him as more than a slave or a problem or a prophecy. The grief was becoming familiar, a constant companion, a weight he carried in his chest that never quite lifted. But Obi-Wan, eyes red from smoke and sorrow, had made a promise. The Council, impressed by Anakin's role in the battle and unable to deny Qui-Gon's dying wish, relented. The boy would be trained. Obi-Wan Kenobi, freshly elevated to Jedi Knight, would take Anakin Skywalker as his Padawan learner, despite his own youth and inexperience as a teacher. The Jedi Temple became Anakin's new home, though he never truly felt at home within its serene halls and meditation chambers. The other younglings had been raised in the Order from infancy, their lives shaped by the code from before memory began. They spoke of peace and detachment as naturally as breathing. But Anakin carried Tatooine in his soul, the heat and anger and fierce attachment to those he loved. He missed his mother with an ache that never diminished, only learned to hide beneath discipline and training. He dreamed of her nightly, sometimes peaceful dreams where she smiled and told him she was proud, sometimes nightmares where she called his name and he couldn't reach her, couldn't save her, could only watch as shadows consumed her face. Obi-Wan Kenobi tried his best to be the master that Anakin needed, but the relationship was complicated from the beginning. Obi-Wan was still processing his own grief, his own sudden elevation to responsibilities he didn't feel ready to bear. He taught Anakin the forms of lightsaber combat, the principles of the Force, the importance of patience and control, but there was a distance between them, a fundamental difference in how they approached the world. Obi-Wan believed in the code, in the wisdom of the Council, in the importance of rules and structure and thinking before acting. Anakin believed in instinct, in the rightness of his emotions, in taking action rather than waiting for permission. They clashed constantly, their arguments echoing through the training halls, Master frustrated by Padawan's recklessness, Padawan chafing under Master's caution. Yet beneath the friction, there was genuine affection. Obi-Wan recognized the good in Anakin, the loyalty and courage and capacity for joy that made the boy magnetic to those around him. Anakin respected Obi-Wan's skill and dedication, even when he disagreed with his methods. They became not just master and apprentice, but brothers in all but blood, bound by shared trials and the memory of Qui-Gon Jinn's faith in them both. As years passed, as Anakin grew from boy to teenager to young man, their partnership deepened even as their philosophical differences remained unresolved. The Force sang through Anakin like a symphony that never stopped playing. His power grew at a rate that astonished even the oldest masters. Abilities that took others decades to master, he achieved in months. His lightsaber technique blended multiple forms into a personal style that was aggressive, unpredictable, overwhelming. His connection to the living force allowed him to sense danger before it manifested, to react with speed that seemed to bend time. His mechanical aptitude, now enhanced by Jedi training, made him perhaps the finest pilot in the Order, capable of maneuvers that others considered suicidal. When he flew, whether in atmosphere or through the asteroid fields of deep space, he became something more than human, a consciousness merged with machine, moving with a grace that made flying seem like breathing. But power without wisdom is a blade without a hilt, dangerous to friend and wielder alike. Anakin's emotions remained his greatest weakness and, paradoxically, his greatest strength. The Jedi Code preached detachment, but Anakin formed fierce bonds with those he cared about. He loved absolutely, without reservation, with an intensity that frightened the more conservative masters, and love's shadow was fear. Fear of loss, fear that everyone he cared about would eventually be taken from him, as his mother had been taken, as Qui-Gon had been taken. This fear became a wound in his spirit that never quite healed, a vulnerability that would one day be exploited with catastrophic precision. 10 years passed in training, in missions across the galaxy, in growing reputation and skill. Anakin Skywalker became known throughout the Order as the most talented Padawan of his generation, but also the most undisciplined, the most prone to emotional outbursts and reckless decisions. The Council watched him with a mixture of pride and concern, seeing the chosen one they had prophesied, but also sensing the darkness that lurked at the edges of his light. Master Yoda, whose centuries of wisdom had witnessed the rise and fall of thousands of Jedi, felt the future shift and shimmer around the young Skywalker, paths branching in directions that led to either salvation or catastrophe, with no clear indication which destiny would prevail. When Anakin was 19, tall and lean and powerful, his mechanical arm replacing the limb he had lost in a training accident, he received an assignment that would alter the course of his life and the fate of the galaxy. Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo, the former queen who had been present during his liberation from Tatooine, required protection. Assassination attempts against her life had escalated, threatening not just her personally, but the delicate political balance she represented. The senator was leading opposition to the Military Creation Act, legislation that would grant the Republican Army for the first time in 1,000 years. Powerful interests wanted her silenced. The Jedi Council assigned Anakin and Obi-Wan to provide security, a task that seemed routine but would prove to be the beginning of the end. Padme Amidala had grown from the young Queen Anakin remembered into a woman of stunning beauty and fierce political conviction. When he saw her again after a decade apart, the attraction was immediate and overwhelming, a thunderbolt of recognition that went beyond mere physical attraction to something deeper, something that felt like destiny clicking into place. She was everything he had dreamed about in the lonely hours of training. She was intelligent, compassionate, dedicated to justice and the welfare of her people. She looked at him not as a Jedi or a prophecy or a problem to be solved, but as a person, a man, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered beyond their utility to the Order. The attraction was mutual, though Padme fought against it with every rational fiber of her being. She was a senator. He was a Jedi. Both their positions demanded they remain focused on their duties, unencumbered by romantic attachments that could compromise their judgment. But the heart recognizes no rank or code. When they spoke, the conversation flowed as though they had known each other for lifetimes, rather than having spent only brief moments together a decade prior. When their eyes met, the rest of the galaxy seemed to fade into background noise. When he made her laugh, the sound was like music that made his chest ache with longing. After another assassination attempt, Obi-Wan departed to investigate the conspiracy, while Anakin was assigned to escort Padme back to Naboo, to keep her safe on her homeworld, while the Senate recess removed her from immediate danger. The journey to Naboo became a romance disguised as a security mission. In the Lake Country, among rolling hills and pristine waters, surrounded by beauty that seemed designed by the Force itself to frame their growing love, Anakin and Padme's relationship transformed from professional to personal to something that transcended every boundary either of them had been taught to maintain. Anakin spoke of his dreams for the galaxy, of his frustration with the Jedi Council's caution, of his certainty that he could do more, be more, if only he were not held back by rules that seemed designed to limit rather than enhance his potential. Padme spoke of her fears for the Republic, of the corruption creeping through the Senate, of the sense that democracy itself was under threat from forces that preferred order to freedom. They walked through meadows where flowers bloomed in colors that seemed unreal. They shared meals overlooking water that reflected the sky like liquid mirror, and they fell in love with an inevitability that felt like gravity, a force as natural and irresistible as planets orbiting a star. But Anakin could not fully surrender to happiness. The dreams had returned, worse than before. Night after night, he saw his mother. Not peaceful dreams, not memories, visions, premonitions. Shmi Skywalker was in pain. She was suffering. She was crying out for help, for her son, for salvation that wasn't coming. The visions came with such clarity, such visceral detail, that Anakin would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, Padme's concerned face hovering over him in the darkness. He knew, with the certainty that only the Force could provide, that his mother was in danger, that she was dying, that he had very little time. Despite his orders, despite Obi-Wan's instructions to remain on Naboo, Anakin made the choice that would become the pattern for his life. He acted on emotion rather than reason. He chose love over duty. He took Padme and departed for Tatooine, racing against time and fate, driven by the absolute certainty that he could save her if only he arrived in time. The journey across hyperspace felt eternal. Every moment another second of his mother's suffering, another heartbeat closer to loss. He pushed their ship to its limits, his hands white-knuckled on the controls, his jaw clenched with determination and fear. Tatooine had not changed. The twin suns still burned. The sand still stretched endlessly in every direction. Mos Espa still stank of decay and desperation. But his mother was gone, freed from slavery years ago and married to a moisture farmer named Cliegg Lars. Anakin found the Lars homestead, a humble compound on the desert's edge, and learned the truth that shattered him. Shmi had been kidnapped by Tusken Raiders weeks ago. A rescue party had found only death and failure. She was gone, presumed dead, mourned and buried in the grief of those left behind. Except she wasn't dead. Not yet. Anakin felt her, a fading spark in the vast emptiness of the dune sea. He took a speeder bike and rode into the night, guided by the Force and desperation, racing toward the Tusken camp with single-minded intensity. The raiders' settlement materialized from the darkness like a nightmare given form, their tents and fires and harsh, barking speech filling the air with menace. Anakin moved through them like a shadow, using the Force to cloud minds and still sounds, infiltrating deeper into their camp until he found the tent where they kept their captive. His mother hung from posts, bound and beaten, her body a map of suffering written in bruises and dried blood. When he cut her down, when she fell into his arms, her eyes opened. Recognition flickered. A smile, weak but genuine, touched her lips. She whispered his name, told him he had grown so handsome, told him she was complete, that her life had meaning because he had been part of it. And then, as Anakin held her, as he tried to pour his love and his will and his power into her failing body, Shmi Skywalker died, her last breath, a sigh that carried her spirit into the Force and left her son holding an empty shell. Something broke inside Anakin in that moment, something fundamental and irreparable. The grief was not just sadness but rage, not just loss but fury at a universe that would allow this to happen, that would let his mother suffer and die while he, with all his power and destiny and supposed importance, arrived too late to save her. The Tusken Raiders had killed her. They would pay. All of them. Every last one. The darkness that had always lurked at the edges of his consciousness rushed in like a flood breaking through a dam. What Anakin did in that Tusken camp was slaughter. Not justice, not self-defense. Murder. He ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade casting violent shadows across the tent walls, and he began killing with a savagery that would have horrified his Jedi masters. Men fell first, their guttural cries cut short as his blade found throats and hearts and heads. But he didn't stop. The women who emerged to defend their home, he cut them down. The children who ran screaming, he pursued them, his face a mask of tears and hate, his mind drowning in darkness so complete that the screaming in his head merged with the screaming outside until he could no longer tell the difference. When it was over, when every Tusken in the camp lay dead and the sand was dark with blood, Anakin stood among the corpses, his lightsaber still ignited, his breathing ragged, his cheeks wet with tears that wouldn't stop flowing. The force around him felt sick, corrupted, the dark side clinging to him like oil. He had crossed a line that Jedi were never supposed to cross. He had acted not as a protector but as an avenger. He had become, for those terrible minutes, everything the Sith represented. And deep in the bowels of the Senate building on Coruscant, a Sith Lord named Darth Sidious, who wore the face of Chancellor Palpatine in public, felt the disturbance in the Force and smiled, sensing opportunity in the young Jedi's fall. Anakin returned to the Lars homestead, carrying his mother's body, his face empty, his soul hollowed out. Padme tried to comfort him, but what comfort existed for what he had done? He confessed to her in broken whispers, the words spilling out like poison he needed to purge. He told her about the slaughter, about the darkness he had felt, about the pleasure that had coursed through him even as he wept. He expected her to recoil, to fear him, to recognize the monster he had become. But Padme held him instead, her own eyes filled with tears, her arms wrapping around him as though she could hold together the pieces that were breaking apart. Her acceptance of his darkness, her refusal to abandon him even after his confession, forged a bond between them that went beyond love into something more dangerous, a folie à deux, where they would enable each other's worst impulses in the name of devotion. Shmi Skywalker was buried in the desert she had hated, the ceremony simple and painful, Anakin's promise echoing in his mind like mockery. He had sworn to free her, to return with power enough to change her life. He had returned too late, his power useless, his promises empty. The guilt and rage settled into his bones like poison, a wound that would never heal, a darkness that would fester and grow until it consumed everything he was and everything he loved. A message from Obi-Wan interrupted their grief. His investigation had led him to the planet Geonosis, where he had discovered a separatist plot of staggering scope. Count Dooku, once a Jedi Master himself before leaving the Order in disillusionment, had assembled an alliance of corporate powers and created a droid army of millions. The Clone Wars that the Republic feared were not a future possibility, but a present reality. Obi-Wan had been captured. He needed rescue. The Jedi Council was mobilizing, and Anakin, still raw from his mother's death and the darkness he had embraced, flew toward another battle, another chance to lose himself in violence that might, for a moment, make him forget the blood on his hands. Geonosis was a red planet of rock and dust and massive droid foundries that worked without ceasing, churning out battle droids and war machines in numbers that defied comprehension. In the planet's execution arena, Obi-Wan was chained alongside Anakin and Padme, sentenced to death by massive creatures that served as entertainment for the Separatist leadership. But the Jedi had arrived in force, nearly 200 knights and masters descending into the arena with lightsabers ignited, a circle of light against the surrounding darkness. The Battle of Geonosis began with a clash between the Order's finest warriors and endless waves of battle droids, the arena becoming a crucible where the Clone Wars would truly ignite. Anakin fought with a fury enhanced by his recent darkness, his lightsaber a blur of motion, his body moving with preternatural grace through the chaos of battle. Droids fell in pieces around him. Geonosian warriors diving from above met his blade and tumbled broken to the sand. But even the Jedi's power could not overcome sheer numbers. The droids kept coming, an endless tide of metal and blasters, surrounding the diminishing circle of defenders, cutting them down one by one. Dozens of Jedi fell, their lights extinguished, their bodies adding to the carnage. The survivors fought on, but defeat seemed inevitable, the mathematics of attrition favoring the machines. Then salvation arrived from an unexpected source. The Republic had an army after all, not droids, but clones, genetic duplicates created in secret on the waterworld of Kamino, designed from the template of the galaxy's finest bounty hunter. Gunships descended from the sky, clone troopers in white armor pouring into the arena, their blasters adding firepower that finally began to turn the tide. Master Yoda himself had led the Grand Army of the Republic to Geonosis, the ancient Jedi recognizing that war had arrived whether the Order wanted it or not. The Jedi became generals that day, their peacekeeping mandate transformed into military leadership. Their role as protectors expanded to encompass command of legions. The battle expanded beyond the arena to the plains beyond, where thousands of droids faced thousands of clones in the first major engagement of the conflict that would consume the galaxy. Anakin pursued Count Dooku, chasing the Separatist leader into a hangar where the ancient Sith Lord waited, his curved lightsaber ignited, his aristocratic face calm with the confidence of one who had studied the dark side for decades. Obi-Wan arrived first, engaging Dooku in a duel that quickly demonstrated the Master's superiority. Dooku's technique was flawless, elegant, economical. He disarmed Obi-Wan with contemptuous ease, a slash across the arm and leg leaving the Jedi Knight crumpled and helpless. Anakin attacked with rage rather than discipline, his grief and guilt and hatred fueling his strikes with power that Dooku initially struggled to counter. For a moment, the old Sith Lord's eyes widened with surprise and something like respect. The boy was strong, far stronger than his age and training should allow. But strength without control was ultimately vulnerable. Dooku shifted tactics, drawing on the dark side's seductive power, using the Force to hurl objects and manipulate the environment, creating openings that Anakin's aggression left exposed. A flick of the wrist, a surge of lightning. And Anakin's right arm, his mechanical limb, was severed, the prosthetic tumbling away in sparking ruin, leaving him screaming and helpless on the hangar floor. Master Yoda arrived as Dooku prepared to finish his defeated opponents. The ancient Jedi Master, small and seemingly frail, revealed the immense power that centuries of wisdom and connection to the Force could manifest. The duel between Yoda and Dooku was a thing of supernatural speed and skill, two masters of the Force wielding abilities that bent reality itself. They flew and spun through the hangar, their lightsabers blurs of color, their Force powers clashing in waves that sent debris flying and cracked the walls. But Dooku was not there to win. He was there to escape, to report to his true master, to confirm that the Clone Wars had begun exactly as planned. He fled into a waiting ship, leaving Yoda and the wounded Jedi behind, victorious in battle but defeated in the larger scheme that was unfolding. Anakin received a new mechanical arm, more sophisticated than his previous prosthetic, a reminder of his defeat and his limitations. But the personal loss was overshadowed by the galactic transformation occurring around him. The Clone Wars had begun. The Republic had an army. The Jedi had become generals, and Anakin Skywalker, despite his youth and his recent failures, was promoted to Jedi Knight, his exceptional power and skill making him too valuable to leave at Padawan rank when commanders were desperately needed for the war effort. On Naboo, in a secret ceremony attended only by droids, Anakin and Padme married, speaking vows that violated every principle of the Jedi Code and the Senate's expectations for its members. They knew the relationship was forbidden, that discovery would end both their careers and possibly their freedoms. But they also knew that their love was the only real thing in a galaxy increasingly defined by lies and politics and war. They married in defiance of rules that seemed suddenly small and arbitrary compared to what they felt for each other. And in that moment of joy and rebellion, they sealed their fates, creating a secret that would have to be protected at any cost, a vulnerability that their enemies would eventually exploit with devastating precision. The Clone Wars consumed 3 years of Anakin's life. 3 years that aged him far beyond their calendar measure. He became a hero of the Republic, his name spoken with reverence and hope across thousands of star systems. General Skywalker, the hero with no fear, leading the 501st Legion and the clone troopers who painted their armor blue in his honor. He fought on dozens of worlds, in hundreds of battles, his tactics brilliant and aggressive, his success rate extraordinary. Christophsis and Teth, Ryloth and Malastar, Camino and Umbara. Each world became another scar, another memory of clones dying under his command, of civilians caught in crossfire, of the moral compromises that war demanded from even the most idealistic warriors. Obi-Wan Kenobi fought alongside him frequently, their partnership matured by shared trials into something approaching the ideal master-Padawan relationship they had always struggled to achieve. They balanced each other. Anakin's aggressive instincts tempered by Obi-Wan's caution. Obi-Wan's overthinking pushed into action by Anakin's urgency. They saved each other's lives repeatedly, their connection through the Force, allowing them to coordinate in battle with a precision that made them nearly unbeatable as a team. The clones loved them, troops who would follow either Jedi into any danger, confident in the general's abilities and care for their welfare. But the war was a trap disguised as necessity. Every battle the Republic won, the Separatists adapted. Every victory bred 10 new crises. The conflict expanded rather than contracted, drawing more systems into its gravity, consuming resources and lives at an ever-accelerating rate. And behind it all, invisible to the Jedi despite their powers, Darth Sidious orchestrated both sides, playing the Republic and Separatists against each other like instruments in a symphony only he could hear. The Sith Lord's long game was approaching its crescendo. The Jedi's destruction had been planned for decades, woven into the Clone Wars' very fabric, encoded into the clone troopers' genetic programming as a hidden protocol waiting for activation. Anakin's power continued to grow, his connection to the Force deepening with each trial. He became perhaps the Order's finest warrior, his lightsaber skills surpassing even renowned duelists like Master Windu. His ability to lead clones into battle and bring them out alive earned fierce loyalty from his troops. His piloting made him a legend, dogfights and impossible maneuvers that became stories told with awe in cantinas across the galaxy. But with power came pride, and with success came expectation. Anakin began to believe his own legend, to trust his instincts over the Council's wisdom, to see himself as special, chosen, destined for greatness that the old Jedi Masters were too cautious and calcified to recognize. His relationship with Padme remained secret but grew more intense, their stolen moments together becoming the only peace either of them knew in a galaxy at war. When the Senate was not in session, when his military duties allowed, they would meet at her apartment on Coruscant, a refuge high above the city where they could pretend, for a few precious hours, that they were just two people in love, rather than a Jedi general and a senator trapped in a web of politics and violence. They spoke of ending the war, of the life they would have afterward, of children and peace, and a future where they could love openly without fear of consequences. These dreams sustained them through the nightmare of the present, giving Anakin something to fight for beyond abstract concepts of duty and democracy. But the visions returned, not of his mother this time, of Padme. She was in pain, dying, her pregnant belly swollen as she reached toward him and gasped for breath that wouldn't come. The dreams came with the same clarity as before, the same certainty that they were not merely nightmares but premonitions, glimpses of a future racing toward him like a collision he couldn't avoid. Padme was indeed pregnant. Their secret now compounded, their risk multiplied, and Anakin, who had failed to save his mother despite all his power, became obsessed with preventing this new vision from becoming reality. He would not lose Padme. He could not lose Padme. He would do anything, pay any price, break any rule, to keep her alive. Chancellor Palpatine became a confidant during this crisis, the one person Anakin felt he could trust with his fears and frustrations. The Supreme Chancellor had always shown special interest in young Skywalker, had always been available when Anakin needed counsel, had always offered understanding where the Jedi Council offered judgment. Their conversations grew longer and deeper, Palpatine gently pushing at the boundaries of Jedi orthodoxy, suggesting that perhaps the Council's rules were too rigid, that greater power could be found beyond the narrow path the Order prescribed. He spoke of the Sith not as evil but as pragmatists, beings willing to embrace the full spectrum of the Force rather than limiting themselves to half its potential. These conversations were poison administered in drops too small to taste. Palpatine was grooming Anakin with patience born of Sith discipline, identifying every vulnerability, exploiting every insecurity, building a dependence that would prove crucial when the moment came to turn Jedi into Sith. He told Anakin the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord who had learned to manipulate midi-chlorians to create life and prevent death, powers the Jedi would never teach because they required diving into the dark side's depths. The story was bait, perfectly designed to hook a desperate man. If such power existed, if death itself could be conquered, then Padme could be saved. The Jedi Council grew increasingly suspicious of Palpatine and his ever-expanding emergency powers. The war, now 3 years old with no end in sight, had transformed the Republic into something dangerously close to a dictatorship, with the Chancellor accumulating authority that no single person should wield. When Palpatine appointed Anakin as his personal representative to the Jedi Council, it created a crisis that exposed the deep fractures between the Order and the government it served. The Council accepted Anakin onto the Council itself, an unprecedented honor for one so young, but refused to grant him the rank of Master, a deliberate slight that Anakin experienced as betrayal and humiliation. More painfully, the Council asked Anakin to spy on Palpatine, to report on his activities, to use their friendship as a tool of surveillance. The request violated everything Anakin believed about loyalty and honor. Palpatine was his friend, perhaps his only true friend outside of Obi-Wan and Padme. The Chancellor had always believed in him, always supported him when the Council doubted. To spy on him felt like a corruption of something pure, a degradation of trust into politics. But Anakin agreed, because he was still a Jedi, still trying to follow the code even as it chafed against his every instinct. The war reached its climax with the Outer Rim sieges and the attack on Coruscant itself. General Grievous, the cyborg supreme commander of the Separatist forces, led a brazen assault on the Republic capital, penetrating through orbital defenses and kidnapping Chancellor Palpatine from his own offices. Anakin and Obi-Wan led the rescue mission, a desperate space battle through the flaming wreckage of dozens of ships, fighting their way aboard Grievous's flagship and cutting through droids and obstacles to reach the Chancellor. Count Dooku waited for them in the observation tower, the Sith Lord ready for a rematch with the Jedi who had escaped him on Geonosis. The duel was brief and brutal. Obi-Wan was quickly disabled, left unconscious, leaving Anakin to face Dooku alone. But Anakin was no longer the reckless Padawan of 3 years prior. He was a hardened warrior, his skills refined by constant combat, his power swollen by rage and fear, and the darkness he had already embraced. He overwhelmed Dooku, his strikes carrying the weight of 3 years' frustration and desperation. When the Sith Lord stumbled, when his lightsabers clattered away, Anakin crossed both blades at his throat, poised to deliver the killing blow. Palpatine, still bound to the chair where Dooku had placed him, urged Anakin to strike. Kill him. Do it. He was a traitor. He deserved death. Anakin hesitated, the Jedi Code's prohibition against executing helpless prisoners warring with his anger and the Chancellor's encouragement. But Dooku was not helpless. He was dangerous. He had hurt Obi-Wan. He had cut off Anakin's arm years ago. He was a Sith Lord who would escape justice if given the chance. The rationalizations spun through Anakin's mind in the second before he acted. Justifications that let him do what the darkness wanted. The blade scissored. Dooku's head tumbled from his shoulders, and Anakin Skywalker took another step toward the abyss, killing an unarmed prisoner at Palpatine's suggestion, compromising his principles in the name of pragmatism. The Republic fleet destroyed Grievous's flagship shortly after the rescue, the vessel breaking apart and falling toward Coruscant in a screaming descent that should have killed everyone aboard. But Anakin flew the disintegrating ship like he had been born to it, wrestling with failing controls and impossible variables, somehow bringing the forward section down on a runway with enough grace that most aboard survived. The landing was considered one of the greatest piloting feats in Republic history, another legend added to the hero with no fears growing mythology. But Anakin barely noticed the accolades. Padme was waiting for him, her pregnancy beginning to show, the visions intensifying in his mind to the point where he sometimes couldn't distinguish present from premonition. She would die in childbirth. The visions showed it with absolute clarity. He had to find a way to save her. The Jedi healing techniques were insufficient. The medical technology of the galaxy's finest hospitals offered no guarantees, but the dark side, if Palpatine was to be believed, held powers over life and death that could prevent the future Anakin feared. The turning point came on a night lit by Coruscant's billions of lights, the city planet glowing like a jewel against the darkness of space. Anakin had been summoned to a performance of Squid Lake at the galaxy's opera house, where Chancellor Palpatine maintained a private box. The Chancellor seemed different that evening, his usual political mask slipping to reveal something deeper and darker beneath. He spoke of the Force not as two separate sides but as a spectrum, a totality that only the Sith were willing to embrace fully. He told Anakin that he knew of his fears, knew about Padme's pregnancy, knew about the visions of death that haunted his sleep. Then Palpatine revealed the truth that would shatter Anakin's world and remake it in darkness. He was the Sith Lord the Jedi had been searching for. He was Darth Sidious, the architect of the Clone Wars, the puppet master who had orchestrated the Republic's transformation into an empire waiting to be born. He had manipulated both sides of the conflict, had played the Jedi and the Senate like instruments, all to achieve power that would span the galaxy and endure for 1,000 years. And he could teach Anakin the power to prevent death, the dark side techniques that could save Padme if only Anakin would abandon the Jedi and embrace his true destiny as a Sith Lord. Anakin's mind reeled. He ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade casting harsh shadows in the opera box, his hand trembling with shock and betrayal and confusion. Palpatine made no move to defend himself, sitting calmly, his eyes yellow and ancient, his smile knowing. If Anakin struck him down, Padme's only hope would die with him. If Anakin let him live, he was betraying the Jedi Order, the Republic, everything he had fought for across 3 years of war. The choice seemed impossible, a trap with no right answer. Palpatine waited patiently, a spider at the center of a web spun across decades, confident that Anakin would make the only choice his fear would allow. Anakin didn't kill the Chancellor. He fled instead, returning to the Jedi Temple in turmoil, seeking guidance from Master Windu, confessing the truth about Palpatine's identity. The Council's reaction was immediate and decisive. Mace Windu assembled a strike team of Masters Agen Kolar, Saisi Tien, Kit Fisto, and departed to arrest the Chancellor, ordering Anakin to remain behind, to not be present for the confrontation, recognizing that the young knight's relationship with Palpatine created a conflict of interest that could prove dangerous. In the temple, waiting alone in a chamber where light filtered through high windows, Anakin spiraled deeper into panic. Padme was going to die. The visions showed it. Only Palpatine could save her, and the Jedi were going to kill Palpatine. The logic seemed inexorable, a chain of causation that led to only one conclusion. If the Chancellor died, Padme died. The choice wasn't between light and dark, between good and evil. It was between Jedi principles and the woman he loved, between abstract morality and concrete survival, between duty and devotion. When framed that way, there was no choice at all. Anakin raced to the Chancellor's office in the Senate building, arriving to find Mace Windu standing over Palpatine's body, the Sith Lord apparently defeated, his face scarred by his own Force lightning reflected back upon him by Windu's lightsaber. The other masters lay dead, cut down by Sidious's impossible speed and ancient skill. Windu raised his blade to deliver the killing blow, to end the Sith and their machinations once and for all. And Anakin, desperate beyond reason, made the choice that would echo across the galaxy, in suffering and death. He ignited his lightsaber and cut off Mace Windu's hand. The Jedi Master's weapon tumbled away. Palpatine, suddenly no longer helpless, unleashed lightning that lifted Windu from his feet and hurled him through the window, sending him falling thousands of stories to his death in the depths below. The darkness surged through the room like a physical presence, and Anakin Skywalker, on his knees, broken and weeping, pledged himself to Darth Sidious, accepting the title of Darth Vader, becoming a Sith Lord in exchange for the promise of power to save his wife. The transformation was not instantaneous, not a single moment of corruption, but rather the culmination of 1,000 small compromises and fears. But it was also absolute. Having chosen, having crossed the line, Anakin found that returning was impossible. The guilt of what he had just done, the murder of Mace Windu, the betrayal of the Order, demanded justification, rationalization, a framework that would let him live with himself. The dark side provided that framework. The Jedi were corrupt, holding him back, too weak to do what was necessary. Palpatine offered strength, offered the power to prevent death, offered a vision of order imposed on the chaotic galaxy. If the cost was betraying everything he had been, then that price was worth paying to save Padme. Palpatine's first command for his new apprentice was genocide. The Jedi Order had to be destroyed, every last member killed before they could regroup and threaten the new order being established. Darth Vader, his eyes beginning to burn with the yellow taint of the dark side, led the 501st Legion to the Jedi Temple. The clone troopers, responding to Order 66, encoded in their genetic programming, turned on the Jedi across the galaxy without hesitation or remorse. In the temple, Vader ignited his lightsaber and began slaughtering everyone within. Masters, knights, Padawans, younglings, no one was spared. The children who looked to him with confusion and hope, who called him Master Skywalker and asked what they should do, he cut them down without mercy, their small bodies falling in halls that had been built as sanctuaries of light. The temple burned. Smoke rose into Coruscant's sky like a funeral pyre for the Jedi Order itself. Vader stood among the dead, his hands covered in blood, both literal and metaphorical, his soul so deep in darkness that light seemed like a distant memory. The Force itself recoiled from what he had become, the living energy that connected all things screaming in anguish at the corruption of one who had been prophesied to bring balance. But Vader felt only certainty, only the cold clarity that the dark side provided when conscience and compassion were burned away. He was doing what was necessary. He was saving Padme. Everything else was irrelevant. Palpatine, now openly declaring himself Emperor and transforming the Republic into the First Galactic Empire, sent Vader to Mustafar to eliminate the Separatist leadership. The war's other side, having served its purpose, needed to be removed so that Palpatine's control would be absolute. Vader arrived at the volcanic world's mining facility like a dark angel, his black robes swirling, his lightsaber igniting to bathe the conference room in red light. The Separatist leaders, expecting their Sith ally to bring news of victory, instead found only death. Vader slaughtered them methodically, his strikes precise and brutal, his power so overwhelming that their guards and defenses meant nothing. The war ended not with negotiations or surrender but with murder, the victors writing history to claim righteousness they had never possessed. Padme, on Coruscant, learned of the temple's fall and the Chancellor's transformation. Worse, she learned that Anakin had led the attack, that her husband had become a killer of children, a servant of evil. Her heart broke with such completeness that breathing became difficult. She had loved him absolutely, had believed in the goodness she saw in him, had thought their love could survive anything. But there were limits to love. Lines that once crossed made redemption impossible. She took her ship and departed for Mustafar, needing to see him, needing to confirm the impossible truth. Obi-Wan Kenobi, having survived Order 66 on Utapau through luck and the Force's warning, returned to Coruscant to find the temple in ruins and the security recordings showing Vader's atrocities. The images of younglings cut down by the lightsaber of his former Padawan, his brother in all but blood, shattered something fundamental in Obi-Wan's spirit. He found Padme preparing to leave, desperate and destroyed, and he asked to accompany her, to confront Anakin, to end what his failure as a teacher had allowed to happen. Padme refused his company, unable to admit that Obi-Wan might be right, that the man she loved might be beyond saving. But Obi-Wan stowed away on her ship, hidden, following her to the confrontation that would determine the galaxy's fate. On Mustafar, against a backdrop of lava rivers and volcanic fury, Padme found Vader waiting on the landing platform. She emerged from her ship, pregnant and desperate, and tried to reach the man she had married. She begged him to stop, to come away with her, to abandon this path before it consumed him entirely. But Vader heard only betrayal in her words, only weakness and lack of faith in his vision. When Obi-Wan emerged from the ship, having revealed his presence too soon in his urgency to confront his former apprentice, Vader's rage exploded. Padme had brought his enemy to kill him. She had chosen the Jedi over her husband. She had betrayed him just like everyone else. Vader reached out through the Force and began choking her, his hand closing in a grasping gesture, Padme's throat constricting as she clawed at her neck and gasped for breath. Obi-Wan's shout of rage broke Vader's concentration. Padme collapsed to the platform, unconscious but alive, her body showing the first signs of stress that would doom her as surely as any weapon. And the two brothers, master and apprentice, now bitter enemies divided by choices and darkness, ignited their lightsabers for a duel that would become legend. They fought across Mustafar's mining facility with a fury born of love turned to hate. Obi-Wan's blue blade met Vader's red in patterns they both knew intimately. Techniques they had practiced together for over a decade, now turned against each other with lethal intent. They crashed through control rooms and across balconies, suspended over lava, their battle a display of power and skill that transcended normal combat to become something mythic. Vader fought with aggressive rage, his strikes meant to overwhelm and destroy. Obi-Wan fought with defensive precision, his style focused on turning aggression back upon itself, waiting for the opening that emotion would inevitably create. The facility crumbled around them as their battle disrupted systems and broke supports. They leapt onto collection arms extending over lava flows, suspended above Inferno by thin metal, their duel continuing without pause even as the structure beneath them threatened collapse. Vader was stronger, younger, more powerful in raw force ability. But Obi-Wan was wiser, more disciplined, fighting not to win but to survive, until his opponent's darkness created the vulnerability that would end it. That vulnerability came as they leapt to the volcanic shore, Obi-Wan claiming the high ground on a black sandbank, while Vader stood on a collection arm dipping toward lava. Obi-Wan pleaded one last time. It was over. He had the advantage. Anakin should surrender, should accept defeat, should stop this madness before it cost him everything. But Vader, consumed by arrogance and dark side corruption, saw only another challenge to overcome. He launched himself at Obi-Wan in a spinning attack, his lightsaber rotating in a technique designed to overpower any defense. Obi-Wan's blade moved with the precision of a master who had studied that technique, who had invented counters to it, who knew his student's moves better than the student knew them himself. The blue lightsaber swept through empty air where Vader's leap carried him, then came back in a horizontal slice that cut through limbs and body with surgical exactness. Vader's legs separated at the knees, his remaining organic arm fell away at the elbow. He tumbled onto the black sand, his lightsaber tumbling away into lava, his body broken and helpless, his eyes burning with yellow hate that would never die. Vader began sliding toward the lava's edge, the heat growing from unbearable to lethal. His clothes caught fire. His remaining organic flesh began to burn, and he screamed, not just with physical agony but with the sound of a soul being destroyed, a voice that carried across the volcanic wastes like the cry of the damned. Obi-Wan stood watching, tears streaming down his face, his heart shattered by what he had done to the boy he had raised, the brother he had loved. He retrieved Anakin's fallen lightsaber, taking it as the only memorial to the man who had been, and turned away, unable to watch his greatest failure burn alive, but unwilling to grant the mercy of a quick death. Darth Sidious arrived in the aftermath, drawn by the disturbance in the Force and the silence where his apprentice's presence had blazed. He found Vader more corpse than man, his body charred and mutilated, his lungs burned, his life hanging by the thinnest thread. But the dark side sustained what light would have let die. Sidious had invested too much in Anakin Skywalker's corruption to let him expire on Mustafa's shore. He brought Vader back to Coruscant, to a secret medical facility where the galaxy's finest medical droids and darkest Sith techniques would rebuild what remained into something that could still serve the Empire. The transformation from man to machine was agony beyond description. Vader's ruined body was encased in armor that both sustained and imprisoned him, a helmet sealed over his burned head, visual sensors replacing eyes that could no longer see, breathing apparatus forcing air into lungs that could no longer function on their own. The armor's systems interfaced directly with his nervous system, every sensation filtered through pain that never ended, never diminished, only became the new baseline of his existence. When the transformation was complete, when Vader stood again, towering and black and utterly inhuman, his first question concerned Padme. Was she safe? Had he succeeded in saving her? Palpatine told him the truth with calculated cruelty. Padme was dead, killed in his anger. The Force choke on Mustafar had damaged her too severely, the stress triggering complications that resulted in death despite the medical intervention. But she had lived long enough to deliver their children, twins she had named Luke and Leia, before her heart stopped beating. Vader's children existed somewhere in the galaxy, hidden, but Padme was gone, dead by his hand, her life ended by the very power he had embraced to save her. The scream that emerged from Vader's vocabulator echoed through the medical facility like the birth cry of a demon. The dark side surged through him with such force that equipment exploded, walls cracked, medical droids were crushed by invisible hands. The pain and grief and self-hatred crystallized into something harder than diamond, colder than space, blacker than any darkness the galaxy had known. Anakin Skywalker had died on Mustafar. What remained was only Vader, sustained by hate and fury and the agony that never stopped. a broken thing in a black shell, serving a master who had destroyed everything he had been. The galaxy submitted to the Empire's iron rule. The Jedi were exterminated, the survivors hunted by Inquisitors and Vader himself. Democracy died to thunderous applause as the Senate granted Palpatine emergency powers that would never be relinquished. Systems that resisted found their leaders executed and their populations enslaved. The Death Star, a battle station with firepower sufficient to destroy planets, began construction in secret, and Darth Vader became the Emperor's fist, his dark enforcer, his executioner, feared across the galaxy as a figure of nightmare given form. For nearly 2 decades, Vader served without question or mercy. He led campaigns against rebel cells and separatist holdouts. He crushed resistance with tactics that made entire sectors surrender rather than face his wrath. He hunted down the remaining Jedi, engaging them in duels that ended always the same way, his red lightsaber extinguishing their light one by one. The Force had prophesied that Anakin Skywalker would bring balance, and in a twisted way, he had. The Jedi were nearly extinct. The Sith ruled the galaxy, balance achieved through extermination rather than harmony. But the prophecy was not yet complete. The Force works in patterns beyond any single lifetime, weaving threads across generations, ensuring that light persists even in the darkest times. Vader's children had survived, hidden by Obi-Wan and Yoda in locations the Emperor's vast intelligence networks could never trace. Luke Skywalker grew up on Tatooine, raised by Anakin's step-family, dreaming of the stars just as his father had. Leia Organa grew up on Alderaan, adopted by Senator Bail Organa, raised as a princess and a leader, her Force sensitivity untrained but no less powerful for its dormancy. When Luke was 19, the same age Anakin had been when he married Padme, destiny began pulling father and son toward collision. The Rebel Alliance, grown from scattered cells into a genuine threat to the Empire, had stolen the Death Star's plans. Princess Leia, carrying those plans, was captured by Vader above Tatooine. The Force sang with recognition when he interrogated her, his daughter's presence in the Force so similar to Padme's that it created echoes he didn't understand. But he learned nothing from her mind, her resistance extraordinary for one so young. Luke, drawn into the conflict by Obi-Wan's sudden reappearance after nearly 2 decades in exile, found himself on a journey that mirrored his father's. He left his desert home. He learned of the Force. He discovered that his father had been a Jedi before Vader murdered him, a lie Obi-Wan told because the truth was too complicated and terrible to explain. He rescued Leia from the Death Star, losing Obi-Wan to Vader's blade in the process, the old Jedi becoming one with the Force rather than fighting his former student to destruction again. The Battle of Yavin ended with the Death Star's destruction. Luke's torpedoes guided by the Force striking the reactor core exactly as needed, the battle station exploding in a flash visible across several systems. Vader, spiraling away in his damaged fighter, survived the destruction and felt a presence he hadn't sensed in decades. The Force signature of the pilot who had destroyed the station felt achingly familiar, impossible, like an echo of someone Vader had been before the pain and darkness had consumed him. The Emperor dismissed Vader's concerns, but the seed had been planted. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone connected to Vader's past was alive and powerful in the Force. 3 years later, on the ice planet Hoth, Vader learned the name of the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star, Skywalker. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. His children had not died with Padme. At least one had survived. His son was alive, strong in the Force, aligned with the rebellion. The Emperor had lied, had hidden this from him for nearly 2 decades. The rage Vader felt was eclipsed only by a strange sensation he couldn't identify at first, something that felt almost like hope, almost like joy, almost like the man he had been stirring in the prison of his armor. Vader became obsessed with finding Luke, not to kill him, but to turn him, to bring him to the dark side, to rule the galaxy together as father and son in the way that had been denied them. He pursued Luke across the galaxy, to Cloud City on Bespin, where they dueled in a carbon-freezing chamber. Luke fought with Obi-Wan's training and natural talent, but he was no match for Vader's decades of experience and dark side power. Vader could have killed him at any moment. Instead, he disarmed him, cutting off his hand in an echo of the wounds Vader himself had received, and then revealed the truth that shattered the lies Obi-Wan had told. "No, I am your father." The words echoed through the chamber and through Luke's mind, impossible and undeniable. The horror on Luke's face, the revulsion and disbelief and devastation should have pleased Vader. But it didn't. It awakened something that the armor and the pain and the darkness had buried but not killed. Anakin Skywalker, the man who had loved absolutely and lost everything, stirred in his tomb of metal and hate. Luke rejected the offered hand, threw himself into the abyss rather than join his father, choosing possible death over certain corruption. The Emperor recognized the danger immediately. Vader's son had become a vulnerability, a crack in the dark side's hold on his greatest weapon. He ordered Vader to turn Luke, or destroy him, no other options acceptable. But Vader's mind worked behind the mask, schemes forming that were pure Sith pragmatism, but also contaminated by something else, something that felt like the faint beginnings of redemption. If he could turn Luke, they could overthrow Palpatine together, rule as father and son, break the cycle that had trapped Vader in service to a master he had come to hate. It was still darkness, still the Sith way, but it was also something more, a plan that included connection rather than isolation, family rather than betrayal. Luke, rescued by his friends and nursed back to physical health, though his spirit remained wounded, trained with Yoda on Dagobah, the ancient Jedi Master, using his last strength to teach the boy what he needed to face Vader and the Emperor. Yoda confirmed the terrible truth. Vader was indeed Anakin Skywalker, fallen to darkness, more machine than man, twisted and evil. But also still Luke's father, still someone who might be saved if the light in him could be found beneath the layers of corruption and pain. It seemed an impossible task, redemption for someone who had committed atrocities spanning decades. But the Jedi believed in redemption, believed that light could exist in even the darkest soul if only someone cared enough to look for it. The conflict reached its climax above the forest moon of Endor, where the Empire's second Death Star hung incomplete but operational, protected by a shield generator on the moon below and by the Emperor himself, who had come to oversee the trap he had laid for the rebellion. Luke surrendered to Vader on Endor, gambling everything on his belief that his father could be saved. Vader took him to Palpatine, presenting his son as a prize, a new apprentice to replace the broken thing Vader had become. But in the throne room, with the Emperor's cackle echoing off walls and the space battle raging in view through massive windows, Luke fought for his father's soul. He refused to fight when Vader attacked. He hid and defended, trying to reach Anakin beneath the armor with words about love and redemption and the good he could still feel in him. Vader probed Luke's mind and discovered the truth he hadn't known. Not one child, but two. A daughter, Leia. If Luke would not turn, perhaps she would. Perhaps Vader would take her as apprentice instead. The threat to Leia broke Luke's control. He attacked with fury that matched anything Vader had ever shown, his strikes carrying fear and protective rage, driving Vader back step by step, overwhelming the Dark Lord's defenses through sheer desperate power. Vader fell. His hand was severed. He lay defeated, helpless, his son standing over him with lightsaber raised to kill. The Emperor urging Luke to strike, to give in to hate, to take his father's place at Sidious's side. Luke looked at his mechanical hand, then at his father's mechanical body, and saw the parallel, saw the path he was walking that led to becoming another Vader. He deactivated his lightsaber, threw it away, turned to the Emperor, and declared with absolute conviction that he was a Jedi, like his father before him, and that he would never turn to the dark side. It was a victory of will over power, of compassion over hate, of the light side's true strength revealed. Palpatine's patience ended. Lightning erupted from his fingers, blue-white torrents of force energy that struck Luke and lifted him off his feet, burning through his body, torture that made him scream and convulse and beg for help that wasn't coming. The Emperor laughed at the boy's agony, mocking him for his weakness, informing Vader that now the boy would die, that his compassion had sealed his fate. And Vader, lying helpless on the floor, watched his son dying, watched the Emperor destroying Luke with the same powers that had burned Vader on Mustafar, that had kept him in agony for decades. A choice. The same choice he had faced before, but inverted. The Emperor or his family. Power or love. The dark side or something that transcended sides entirely. In that moment, watching Luke die, Anakin Skywalker woke fully from the nightmare that had consumed him. The prophecy had never been about destroying Jedi or Sith. Balance meant ending the cycle of domination, breaking the chains that both sides had wrapped around the Force itself. And it required sacrifice, the one thing the Sith never understood, the power of choosing another's life over your own. Vader stood, his armor sparked and his servos groaned, but he stood. He grabbed the Emperor, lightning transferring from Luke to himself, the energy coursing through his systems and frying circuits that kept him alive. Palpatine screamed, not with pain but with rage at the betrayal, at the failure of his greatest creation. Vader lifted his master and threw him into the reactor shaft, hurling the Emperor to his death in the depths of the Death Star. The lightning ceased. Luke fell, gasping, burned but alive. But Vader was dying. The Emperor's lightning had destroyed the life support systems that had kept him functional for decades. His breathing failed, his vision dimmed, he collapsed, and Luke dragged him toward the hangar, desperate to save his father now that he had finally found him. But Anakin knew it was over. He asked Luke to remove the helmet, to let him see his son with his own eyes, not through the red lenses that had colored his vision for so long. Luke protested. The helmet was all that kept him alive, but Anakin insisted. Just once, just for a moment, he wanted to see clearly. Luke removed the helmet, revealing the scarred and pale face beneath, eyes blue again, the yellow taint of the dark side fading with the darkness itself. Anakin looked at his son, seeing Luke's face properly for the first time, seeing Padme in his features, seeing hope and goodness, and everything that Anakin had once believed in before the fall. He smiled, a small expression but genuine, and told Luke that he had been right. There had been good in him after all, that Luke had saved him, that he was redeemed. Anakin Skywalker died in his son's arms as the Death Star exploded around them, his body becoming one with the Force, his spirit finally free of the armor and the pain and the hate that had imprisoned it for so long. Luke escaped in the last shuttle, carrying his father's armor to burn in the Ewok celebration fires on Endor. And that night, as victory celebrations echoed through the forest, Luke saw 3 Force ghosts watching over him with approval and love. Obi-Wan, who had trained him, Yoda, who had taught him wisdom, and Anakin, restored to the form he had worn before Mustafa's flames, young and whole, and finally at peace, his journey from light to darkness and back to light complete, his purpose fulfilled, the balance restored not through destroying one side, but through proving that love could overcome even the deepest corruption. Legacy. The story of Anakin Skywalker's transformation into Darth Vader and his ultimate redemption stands as the central tragedy and triumph of galactic history. His fall demonstrated how even the most powerful and well-intentioned can be corrupted by fear, by attachment untempered with wisdom, by the promise of power to prevent loss. His decades as Vader represented the dark side's ultimate victory, the chosen one twisted into an instrument of tyranny and death. Yet his redemption proved equally significant, showing that no fall is so complete that return becomes impossible, that love can exist even in the most corrupted heart, waiting for someone brave enough to believe in it. The prophecy was fulfilled not through simple destruction but through the most difficult path, through suffering and choice and the sacrifice of self for another. Balance came not from ending the Force's duality but from demonstrating that light and dark exist within every being, and that the choice between them remains always, even at the very end. Anakin's legacy lives in his children, in the new republic they helped build, in the reminder that destiny is not fixed but shaped by the choices we make when confronted with darkness both within and without. He was the slave who became a hero, the hero who became a monster, and the monster who became, in the final analysis, a man who chose love over hate when it mattered most.